Now we move on. As per a U.S. publication, Hamas is demanding that the bodies of its dead leaders, Yahya and Mohammed Sinwar, be included in the exchange with Israel for 48 hostages held in Gaza. Israel has rejected this demand before. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan suggests releasing the hostages in exchange for 250 Palestinian prisoners, 1,700 Gazans detained since the October 7 attacks, and the remains of 15 Gazans for each dead hostage as indirect talks continue in Egypt. In related developments, Qatar is calling for strong written international guarantees to ensure Israel abides by any agreement, including a halt to hostilities and withdrawal from Gaza. Qatari officials emphasized the importance of details, with their prime minister expected to join talks in Egypt. And for this discussion, we are joined by Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining us. Now, what do you think, what are the chances that these demands made by Hamas of bringing or in exchange of the Israeli hostages, they want their late leaders' bodies back? Do you think this will make another or add another sticking point to these already complicated negotiations, or do you think this has a chance to be accepted?
Okay, so I can't see why the Israelis would object to this. It would be, if this is the sticking point, stopping the Trump plan from coming to fruition, then I think the Israelis are making a mistake. There is absolutely no reason why they shouldn't hand back the bodies of those former Hamas leaders. It's one demand, and I think the Israelis should acquiesce to that demand. I think the major sticking point, however, is the fact that Hamas have not yet accepted that their force as a military force will have further influence in the reconstruction and running of Gaza. They may be a political force still, but not a military force. And I think that's a sticking point. And perversely, I think Israel are quite pleased that Hamas are sticking their heels in on this, because it allows the Israelis to continue to achieve part of their objective, which was to defeat Hamas totally militarily. And as you've suggested, Israel are still continuing with their military incursion in Gaza, despite the, let's say, half-hearted requests from the Trump administration. But on the original point regarding the release of Hamas leaders' bodies, I see absolutely no reason whatsoever why the Israelis should not acquiesce to that request.
And now looking back at this, how does U.S. President Trump's peace plan, which includes the release of Palestinian prisoners and remains of Gaza, aim to address the ongoing hostilities, and how might it be received by both Israel and Hamas?
Right, well, that's a very interesting question. Regarding the bigger number of hostages, in the past, Israel has released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, albeit those that have been sentenced and convicted of murders, etc. So it would not be unusual for Israel to do exactly the same again. I think, as I said, the main sticking point here is, though, not the release of the prisoners, nor the Hamas's suggestion that they will release all the hostages, those who are the bodies of the dead ones and those who are still alive. I really think the sticking point here is the inability of the Arab nations and the Trump administration to pressure Hamas to totally demilitarize. And I think that is a major sticking point in all of this. And as I said before, perversely and paradoxically, the Israeli government are not too displeased that Hamas are sticking to their guns, because it gives them extra time to further dilute their military capabilities.
And Peter, now looking at the international players in these negotiations, what role does Qatar and Turkey in particular play in the indirect negotiations going on in Egypt, and how might their calls for written guarantees impact the likelihood of the ceasefire agreement?
Yeah, they're, as indirect players, as you quite rightly pointed out, their influence is absolutely huge, especially given the recent geopolitical moves in Syria, where Turkey now is the major player. Turkey is to Syria now what Russia was to Syria during the Assad tenure. So Turkey's influence is huge. Qatar also, simply because of its wealth derived from liquefied natural gas and oil, and the influence that she has distributing that wealth to various players, it's greatly influential. And I'm surprised about one thing though. Qatar has demanded from Israel that there will be no further military action in Gaza, and that Qatar herself will be free from Israeli military initiatives. I would have thought that that guarantee would have been given by Trump, who is the main influencer on the Israeli government. So I'm surprised Qatar has yet again requested it. I can understand why she has asked for a complete Israeli stoppage of military action, but as far as her own protection is concerned, I would have thought those guarantees were already in place. Again, it could be that Qatar and Turkey have other issues underneath the surface that they want enforced prior to giving their full assurance to pressure Hamas. They've given their guarantees to Trump, that's for sure, but we're not so sure at the moment if they can force Hamas to comply with all the requirements that the peace process, the 21-point plan, requires.
Peter, thank you for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Israel's military assault on Gaza continues with visible plumes of smoke rising. Several explosions have been occurred after daybreak, following similar blasts and streaks of flares during the night. This comes as Hamas expressed readiness to consider a ceasefire based on a peace plan proposed by U.S. President Donald Trump. However, the group has emphasized the necessity of concrete guarantees to ensure the end of hostilities. Gaza authorities report approximately 67,000 fatalities and widespread devastation since the October 7, 2023 attack by Hamas. Israeli officials report 1,200 deaths and 251 hostages taken by Hamas during that assault. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz. He joins us live from London. Thank you, Peter, for staying with us. Now, as the negotiations go on, so does the shelling and the fight in Gaza. So how do you think this impacts the negotiation? Don't you think that this contradicts or pulls the leg while they are fighting in the back, and then the negotiations are also going on at the same time?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But both parties have an interest at the moment in coming out of the military conflict with credibility. Now, Hamas, one would have thought, would have been totally defeated given the destruction that's happened in Gaza, and the fact that so many Gazans have left the city, and all that are left are Hamas operatives and those steadfast civilians who actually support them. But they've still managed to continue to fire rockets from Gaza into Israel, all of which, I must add, were intercepted. This was only yesterday. And Israel were quite successful in eliminating a rather large Hamas operative cell. I think 20 plus Hamas operatives were killed yesterday in their various tunnels and bunkers. Now, Hamas must be seen to show the Arab world that when the negotiations finally come to fruition, they must come out to be seen with a win, some kind of credibility. This could be an attack on an Israeli tank, killing more soldiers, or taking an Israeli soldier as hostage. They must show something to the Arab world. Similarly, Israel must show to her domestic public who want an end to the war. Believe me, there's nothing more that the Israeli public want, but they must also show that they have achieved their objective in utterly defeating Hamas. Now, whilst the negotiations are not yet 100% rubber stamped, and they're not, I think I said yesterday we're maybe 85% there. Maybe we're still at the same period today. I'm not sure. Perhaps a little bit further down the line as Qatar are joining in the indirect talks. But Israel under Netanyahu must show to its public that this war has been worth fighting and that Hamas has completely, as far as possible, defeated militarily. So both sides, the Israeli government and Hamas, prior to the finalised agreement, both want to come out with some kind of public relations win to show to their audiences that neither side, that both sides have achieved their objective. And I think that's why we're seeing the elongation of the conflict, albeit not as severe as it has been in the days and weeks previously. There's been explosions, yes, but nothing like on the kind of scale we have witnessed in the weeks leading up to this. So that's where we are at the moment. And until that deal is finalised, I expect there would be continued confrontation.
That is very insightful.